Hi, this is the Social Gelo with Angelo show. My name's Angelo. I'm a social scientist, surfer, martial artist, and a whole lot of other things. Coming to you live from Kasai City, Japan, the Social Gelo with Angelo show.
What's up, and welcome to Social Gelo with Angelo podcast. I am here with Timothy Bruce.
Correct.
Wow. See, I say like all questioning myself because I've fucked up people's names for so many years that I just assume that even if I've known you for a few years, that I'm still John Hoylo. To this day, I will fuck up his name every once in a while. So I always throw it out there. So today's podcast is on hybrid martial arts versus MMA. I know it's clickbaity, but hey, you probably wouldn't have clicked on this if it wasn't for that. This is the Social Gelo with Angelo podcast, a podcast about martial arts and psychology, specifically social psychology, and how people relate to cultures, specifically martial arts cultures. I would like to break down and say that culturally, martial artists, depending on what they do, kind of come from different cultures according to the styles they practice. Now, it's not the Kajukenbo podcast. I know a lot of Kajukenbo guys listen. I really appreciate that. I am a Kajukenbo martial artist. If you want to check that out, at the end of the video, there's a whole hour spiel about that. Now, before we get started, I thought it'd be interesting. Oh yeah, just a little bit about Tim. Tim's also a Kajukenbo black belt coming. I know, but it's not the Kajukenbo podcast. I keep saying that. We just happen to be, I know a lot of people that stop. He comes out of hey, where are you coming out of, man? It's not Kentucky. It's
Mountain Home, Arkansas.
Arkansas. Okay, he's coming out of Arkansas out of Colt Combatives. What is there a website they can check out your martial arts stuff at?
Colt Combatives on Facebook.
There you go. Colt Combatives on Facebook. If you want to check out his programs there. So let's just get right to it. I thought it'd be fun, so I decided to Google hybrid martial arts. And this is the list that came up, which I found that was pretty interesting. So if you go onto Wikipedia, it's a lot of different styles. Like I know Kajukenbo is known as a hybrid martial art. So let's just cover what a hybrid martial art is. It's known as a hybrid fighting system, or sometimes eclectic martial arts, or freestyle martial arts. It's referred to as mixed martial arts, and we're gonna get back to that, MMA and mixed martial arts. I don't want to get too far into it, but we'll get back to that in a sec. Or systems that incorporate techniques and theories from several martial arts. While numerous martial arts borrow or adapt from other arts, to some extent, could also be considered hybrids. So let's just get this out of the way now. So I don't want to get this in this later. Is MMA, what's MMA? MMA is a sport. There's a whole other podcast I've done about that too. I don't know if I'm going to have time to link it here, but if you go through my channel playlist, I get together with also Kajukenbo black belt, creator of his system Hawaiian Kempo, and UFC coach John Hackleman. That's his name. He's Chuck Liddell's coach, connected to Chuck Liddell, Glover Teixeira, and Alex Pereira by proxy. So he's a UFC coach, and we did a long discussion about why Kajukenbo is not MMA. And again, it's because MMA is a sport. And I don't want to go down this whole rabbit hole right here because that'll be a whole 30 minutes. I'm trying to get this out there as quickly as possible. MMA is a sport. It's got its own rules. And right now we keep seeing, and this is why we're having this discussion, we keep seeing hybrid martial arts saying that they're MMA. And by the definition that we just talked about as a noun, it is mixed martial arts. As a noun, like definition, it's mixed styles, right? Different stuff. So let's just go over this list real quick. And this is kind of surprising. Some of you are going to be surprised to see this as a hybrid martial art. Maybe some of you will argue that it's not. But this can include and is not limited to, holy crap, Aikido, American Kempo, American Tang Sudo, ARB, Army Combatives, Bartitsu, Close Combat, Combat Hapkido, Combat Hoptak, Defendo. I like that. Emerson Combat Systems, German Jiu-Jitsu, hand-to-hand combat, Hapkido again. Oh boy, from Finland, Hakuryu Jujutsu, Hong Rong Sung Rong Do from Korea, Jailhouse Rock. Wow, there we go. Fighting style United States. Jikundo, I know that one. I don't know it, but I've heard it. Oh, I can't pronounce that. Here we go. Jeitai Kai Koku Jutsu in Japan. Jujutsu from Japan. Jujutsu is not jujitsu. Kami Jutsu, Kajukenbo, Kempo Karate, kickboxing in Japan, Kalaripayat in India, Krav Maga Israel, Kudo Japan. I like Kudo's pretty cool, by the way. I like it. Yeah, I've seen some cool stuff out of them. Kuksul Wong. By the way, if you practice any of these styles, and I told you earlier I'm bad at names. I probably should have made Tim do this. Kunto, South Asia, Kyokushin from Japan, Limi Lama from Samoa, Ling Seng Kunto, Indonesia, Lut Rit Brazil, Marine Corps Martial Arts Program, Mixed Martial Arts Worldwide, Modal Muging, United States, Muay Thai, Thailand, Ochitakawa, Canada, Yong-do, Korea, Pancreas, Japan, Pancration in ancient Greece, Sambo coming out of Russia, Sanda in China, Sanjuro, United Kingdom, Shaolin Kempo Karate, United States, which is also related to Kajukenbo. There's a history there. I did a podcast about that too. Shidokan Karate in Japan, Shotokan Karate in Okinawa, Japan. That's funny, right? Shidokan. And we can get into the areas of why this happens. Why does Okinawa and Japan both have Shotokan pronounced a little bit different, but it's a different style for some reason. Shoot boxing in Japan, shoot wrestling in Japan, shoot fighting in Japan, shuto in Japan, which are all pretty much the same thing. Shurinji Kempo in Japan, which is not related to Shaolin Kempo, but if I translated Shurin Kempo to English, it actually does translate as Shaolin Kempo, but they have two different lineages, with Shaolin Kempo being related to the Godin lineage and Shaolin Kempo in Japan being more related to Chinese lineage back in China. Salat, Indonesia, Simbo Hapkido in South Korea, Sibat, United States, Small Circle Jiu-Jitsu, United States. Hey, you guys were talking about that the other day. Spear System, Special Combat Aggressive Reactionary System, Sistema Russia, Tangsudo, Japan, Unified Weapons Master Australia, Unified in Germany, Valetudo, Brazil, Vovinam, Vietnam, Waikundo, World War II Combatives, Yunya, Yungsudo in Korea, Yusi Budo in Japan, France, and Zero Range Combat in Japan. And I will even add Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I will add that. I don't have time to edit it in right now, but if you look at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it's not a traditional martial art. It started in Brazil. It started from judo. They decided to break it off, and they decided to start mixing in more ground fighting. And then later, before they got into the UFC, they were mixing in, learning how to at least block punches and kicks, and they did learn how to punch and kick. And if you look at Rickson, he was really big on learning a good emphasis in striking before, just jumping into the cage was just solely the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu art that they came up with.
Even before that, Maeda had done lucha libre and catch wrestling down there.
Yeah, so they were mixing it up. So there's the list. So Tim, what do you want to say about all that?
So the first thing I want to say is that entire list can be condensed down to things that came from boxing, wrestling, judo, or karate. No matter what, they're all traced back to one of those four, and they're just variations of those four and branches of those four. And then the better ones are either ones that combine specifically judo, boxing, wrestling, or ones that came from a military system that combine judo, boxing, and wrestling.
And when you look at it, what it comes down to is there's a lot of the styles I just mentioned. And the reason I said that they might not be exactly okay with the idea of you saying it's a hybrid martial art is because a lot of the people that practice these arts, they think it's traditional. Like they have this thing. And like I said earlier, I don't want to get into a long spiel about why a traditional martial art may be what it is. Sorry, I'm having issues with my sound right now. They come from they think they're practicing a traditional martial art. And because of that, when you call it a hybrid martial art, they get their panties in a twist about this. So I don't see why, but why would you think people get upset when you say something like that?
Because everyone wants to be a purist and everyone wants to have the secret. Everyone wants to have their niche little carved out. But to be honest, there's only so many ways the human body can move, and things have been passed down as long as we've been fighting and trying to fight each other. So I think it really always boils down to traditionalists want to have their own little sect. They want to feel like their thing is pure and wholly original.
And Is there an advantage to that?
To having your system be pure, probably only from a selling standpoint, a marketing standpoint. But you'll hear people talk about traditional martial arts. So like you'll think of a form of karate that's a traditional martial art from 1915. Well, BJJ was also from 1915 or 1914 and 1925. So who's to say what is traditional and what isn't? Are we basing tradition off this century, last century, or century before that? Because honestly, they're all within 200 years of each other. They're all rather young. That entire list is probably all within the last 200 years. How traditional is it? Where do we draw the line between traditional and modern?
I think that's the biggest thing, right? So now let's go to MMA. So let's go to MMA. That being said, let's go to MMA. I found another really interesting thread, and I shared it with you guys a while back. Let me see if I can bring it up real quick. Yeah, there it is. I'm gonna share on my computer. Here, share. So here's a post that I found that is coming out of Gracie Humaita Las Vegas team Mika. It's a long name. Shout out to you guys. 30 years ago, the UFC was created to determine which martial art is the most effective in a real fight with no rules, no gloves, and no limits. While we acknowledge the business acumen of the current UFC owners and the toughness and skill of modern fighters, we must contend that the original objective was thwarted in the name of show business. The excessive rules, short rounds, and judge decisions designed to favor stand-up striking and physicality, that's a good one, have increased the entertainment value of show while undermining realism originally intended. In the early days of jiu-jitsu in Brazil, Carlos Gracie Sr. resisted tremendous pressure by promoters in the media and never allowed his younger brother Helio Gracie to fight under such restrictive rules and regulations, which made it impossible to find out who is truly the superior fighter. Which is interesting. It's very interesting to hear this argument, because this is the same argument that I hear a lot of Kempo guys, karate guys, quote unquote traditional martial arts guys that teach you how to poke him in the eye, bite his throat off. They'll always come in and say that MMA as it stands right now isn't brutal enough to demonstrate the true essence of their martial art. And if you look at this thread, it's a lot of people saying that, and some people's arguing the other way, right? Some people arguing the other way. Some people arguing that it should be. And what I told them, what I said pretty much was just fighters are more rounded now. The Gracies did a great job marketing their style, and now everyone from kickboxing to karate to wrestling, they all learn some Brazilian jiu-jitsu to be well-rounded. There's some more than others. It's no longer one style versus another style. It really has become a mixed martial art venue. It's like when it first started, it was very, very much a style. Like if you look at UFC 1, just Google UFC 1, you'll see crazy fights with guys that are, some guys, and I read in his book, Blood in the Cage, great book about Pat Miletich. Check it out. It's out there, it's on Google, and in that book he talks about UFC 1 and their first UFCs and how they would get the fighters. Some of them were they all were randomly chosen. They would just send out like emails to whoever they can contact in the area, and they'd be like, hey, we're having a fight. They had their main card and they set that up, right, with the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guys and any challenges that the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guys had to have them in America. But one of the more catch wrestling kind of thing they were doing was they would just put out a giant memo in the town that they were going to have the event, and they would allow anyone to, they would allow anyone to enter if they got there and they submitted in time. Anyone had a chance to enter. So not only would they get guys that were local karate guys, local boxers, or not local boxers, they'd fly in a boxer, right? Or pro wrestlers. They'd also grab guys straight from bars, like just brawlers, guys that would fight a lot, would sign up, and they'd ask them, what style are you? He's like, I don't know, I'm just a brawler. They'd say, okay, you are karate. And they just, you're kickboxing. They just hand them out a style and throw them out there and say they were that style, because they had to have something on there. They couldn't just put brawler, right? So, and when you look at the original Frank, as Frank the Tank Abbott started moving up, he started training more, became more what we're talking about right now, a mixed martial art. He started training more in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and training in different styles, right? Some boxing here and there. But when he first came in, he was mostly just one of those brawlers. That's what he really was. He was a big guy. He had some wrestling behind him, and mostly just a lot of fights at bars. He was known for drinking a lot and fighting. Eventually, he became a little more refined. But there was a lot of guys with that kind of a background. They'd throw in a style and then they'd go at it. And if you look at UFC, there was a mix of people that just like to fight. And there was also a mix of guys that had a one style, maybe two at most, right? Maybe two, maybe. But most of the guys were coming from one specific style. So it was a little more of a style versus style when we're talking about what it looked like in UFC 1. But you fast forward to now, they're not doing that anymore. Back then, it was still borderline underground fighting. I mean, that if you look at the legally speaking, some of it was underground fighting. Like they were trying. It was Vale Tudo, which was on the list earlier of hybrid mixed martial arts. So like, and Vale Tudo ran the same way in Brazil too. That's where they got this idea. Vale Tudo was the original venue that they used to have these fights for. The Gracies. The Gracies would work with Vale Tudo promotions, and Vale Tudo was very known for this. They'd come in, they'd sometimes if there wasn't enough fighters, they'd ask people from the crowd, catch wrestling style. Does anybody want to come in here and fight our champion? Right? And people were sitting there drinking, watching the fights. I'll take them on, right? So like it was a very Wild West approach to fighting. Obviously now they don't do that. Could you imagine the current UFC? All right, now that now that Alex Ferrer just got done with his title fight, does anybody in the crowd want to come in here and challenge him? So what are your thoughts on all that?
When it comes to like you said, where MMA started, the original idea was trying to put style versus style, and a lot of it was for marketing reasons for the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. But even then, we're talking about the hybrid martial arts. A lot of the styles that were coming into that were already hybrid fighters, right? You had a Savate guy, you had a sumo guy, you had catch wrestling, Shamrock. You know, then some of those guys were already boxing and doing judo fighting, and even in jiu-jitsu, we already talked, they had jiu-jitsu and catch wrestling, so it was a hybrid. So even though we are just said they were traditionalists or at least purists in their forms, even those styles that they're coming into were hybrids.
Yeah, and again, like, and I think it has to do with, and that's what he was trying to say, right? He was trying, and that's what they were trying to argue, that the UFC isn't as good now, and people got mad. Like, people were already saying, like, you know, I forgot, one guy was like saying that I can't even find it. Oh yeah, it's always been mixed. All styles have a multitude of aspects. Bare knuckle boxing, throwing kicks. The founding of karate had throws and arm locks. It's a sport that changes to true martial arts. Sports one thing, martial arts is another. I hear that a lot. Mixed martial arts has always been given names for the promotions of the so-called founders. But the thing is, yes, it's a mixed martial art, but it's not MMA.
Yep.
So like, yes. Go ahead.
Where I draw the line between the two of MMA and hybrid martial arts, MMA is a mixture. You take a few things from whatever you can get that are the best proven inside the sport, whereas hybrid martial arts generally are 2 systems, 3 systems being stitched together as opposed to melded together. Does that make sense? That there are seams. You know, when you talk about your kudo, you have judo and karate, whereas mixed martial arts, you might do judo and karate or judo and wrestling, but it's melded together better, or for purpose of sport, as opposed to having distinct styles where you can tell what part is which. You can see the seams in hybrid martial arts.
And then another thing is, and I think this, again, we're talking about MMA versus hybrid martial arts. In MMA, and this is where there's some overlap. If you go to a, quote, MMA gym, you're going to find essentially a facility that has different people that specialize in different arts. Some of them may come from a hybrid martial art. Actually, technically, they all come from hybrid martial arts. If we just look at the original list I just mentioned, Muay
It's
Thai.
hard. It's hard that you come from anything pure.
Yeah. If anything, I might have to rename this podcast to "Is there such a thing as a pure martial art?" Because a lot of people think there is. Yeah, no,
Yeah, and there's not.
no, there isn't. So, so like, and that a lot, any traditionalists will get really upset right off the bat. But really, if what we're talking about from the list we just talked about, the definition we just talked about, it's really hard to have a quote unquote in this modern age, unless you lived in a vacuum, a bubble, and some other planet that wasn't exposed to Earth. There's it's going to be very difficult for you to say that your martial art is your art alone and is pure and is sticking to the ancient scrolls that you've been reading. And some of them have, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's better. that's the other problem. that's the other issue. Some of them do. I mean, if you look at some of the oldest martial arts, usually coming from India and China, if we're going to look at a lot of the older, like documented, I'm sure there's other martial arts out there, but as far as documented, because the Chinese and people from India have been writing it down, you know, they're like historically speaking, they can write it down longer. So we have more historical documents tracing Kung Fu back quite a bit. But like in those Kung Fu styles, those people that decided to stick to the ancient texts, I don't
think people are around anymore. I think they got weeded out. I think they had a mix to survive. That's the only reason it survives. Every time there's a new dynasty changing over, things get washed through or switched in or changed over. Because you originally started saying how hybrid martial arts and how that connects to culture. Right there. Every time a new culture comes into power, that culture overwrites what was pre-existing there. Think of some of the things that people think are the most traditional martial arts right now. Taekwondo. That is Japanese karate and maybe some Korean taekyon, which was a child's game before that. That's extremely traditional martial art in most people's minds. Shotokan karate. That was Okinawan Tay. And what people are believing now is a lot of savate kicks from the 1890s French military. So even the two most traditional martial arts that most people would think of when you say traditional martial arts, Shotokan, Taekwondo, they're hybrid martial arts.
Kyokushin.
Exactly.
Yeah. And as I'm trying to avoid karate because I'm going to do a whole podcast on just karate, American karate and Japanese karate later. But yeah, a lot of things, a lot of styles that people view as traditional. Another thing, people don't view boxing as traditional.
Right.
It's older. It's older than the previous mentioned styles. That's older than those styles, but no one sees boxing as traditional. No one goes out there, no casual non-martial artist looks at boxing and says, these people are traditional martial artists.
And yet, and the funny thing is, even within a bigger boxing community, you have individuals like, especially the people in the Bartitsu community and the pugilism community, who will look at bare knuckle boxing from olden days and try to recreate the rule sets and recreate the techniques that they used to use back then, and don't realize that pugilism, that bare knuckle boxing, and all that is just traditional versions of boxing. That is traditional boxing.
Yeah, and then also not realizing that, like you said, unless you live in a bubble, we can sit there and say, okay, we're going to recreate the rules that made bare knuckle boxing from back then. But even if you did that, you're still grabbing a modern boxer who's already seen Mike Tyson, who's already seen all your current modern boxing skills. Because boxing evolved, like you just said earlier, like boxing evolved. So even they're gonna grab those skills and now they're just gonna use what they're doing now under that rule set. So it's still not gonna be maybe your rule set will be kind of pure, but your guys are still girls and guys. No one's excluded here. They're still gonna be coming from how they evolved to now. More head movement, right? There was some head movement. It's a lot of head movement in modern boxing because points, right? They turn into a point game. So yeah, we can say it's no longer a point game. It's more about knocking out the guy more, but you still can't separate these things out. You can't pull them apart and say, no, we want to box like they did, right? we want to go back to that. No one's going to want to do that, right? So they're like, no, I mean, it works better like this. This is how we've learned how to do it, and this is how we've evolved with it. And there's no way we're going to do that just because. Now, it's funny when you see them try to do that, right? And I said I'm going to try to avoid the karate argument, but it's interesting when you see some of the karate rules try to do that. Hey, we're not going to allow any hook punches, only straight punches, right? Because we want to try to keep it pure. Yeah, so we're going to say, hey, and you see this a lot in the point fighting. Now I can go more into Taekwondo. You have to chamber the punch. This is one of the things that drove me absolutely insane about point sparring was you had to chamber the punch. And if they didn't see a perfect chamber, hit, return, therefore the point no longer counts to try to keep it pure. And I only did point, I only did two point sparring competitions because my instructor asked me to. Otherwise than that, it was always either continuous, full contact kickboxing or MMA, or grappling, catch wrestling, or jiu-jitsu. But I would not, when I competed, I hated point sparring. I absolutely despised point sparring. Didn't mind it as a training tool. I think it's an awesome training tool, especially when you're working with kids, kind of shy, kind of scared of hitting each other, especially beginners. I think point sparring is a great way to kind of get their toes wet, get them to, kind of warm them up to the idea. I personally don't do it with my kids, but I can see where the idea does come from. Like I can get it. I get that. And again, if that's your thing, it's your thing. I'm not criticizing if that's your thing. If you enjoy doing that, just like some people love basketball, right? And some people love football. Some people like football more than rugby, whatever that is, have at it. I'm just saying the idea of this, I'm going to be a purist and we're going to add this rule set for it to be pure,
is almost a hindrance to what actual combat is supposed to be.
And then that's right. And that's the question. Is it supposed to be combat? I guess that's the other question. Is it supposed to be combat? But when we look at MMA and we look at these sports systems, is it supposed to be combat or entertainment? Right. And I think there's a fine line there. Combat, because a lot of that earlier thread I showed you with the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guys complaining, they were complaining that they're catering more towards entertainment and less combat.
And it's sport more so than entertainment. But yeah, if there's rule sets and points, and there are ways to win without winning, ways of winning without beating your opponent through sheer combat of skill, then it's a sport, and then what you're training is pushed towards a sport. Just like how you take modern, not even karate, modern Taekwondo or anything like that, or modern judo, it's all towards points as opposed to what the actual victory of what that was supposed to represent back in the day was supposed to be. You know, the Ippon was supposed to be another guy throwing another guy down so that he could stab him to death before the battle kept going on.
Yeah.
Well, now you can't exactly finish a fight like that on TV. So send him to the ground, make sure he wouldn't hit his head, or he would have hit his head. Ippon, you win the match. They try to keep the spirit alive, but they lose a lot of the martial aspects of their martial arts.
And then at the same time, though, the rabbit hole that you end up falling under if you decide to say, I want to keep it quote unquote martial pure by not competing in the sport. The rabbit hole that you can easily end up with is Tai Chi. What's going to happen is, or any of those Kung Fu styles that do the deadly stuff. Like I saw a guy, I shared a photo of that guy, but there was another karate guy. There's a karate guy. Like I said, I'm trying to avoid karate as much as I can because I have another podcast on it. But he was talking about how he's practicing the deadly arts, and he was sitting there finger jabbing punching bag. And he was talking about how he was practicing some of the hidden secret techniques, and that there's a lot of secret techniques that are no longer taught because of how deadly they are. And all these karate guys jumped in there talking about these secret techniques. And then I jumped in saying there are no secret techniques, and everyone said, no, you don't know them because you've never seen them because they're a secret. And so and I live in Japan. I teach a karate guy, for Christ's sakes. So it's a traditional, I mean, his secrets. He's there. I trained the dude. He showed me some of those secrets. That's not, yeah, either way. What happened, that rabbit hole, the problem about that, and this is why I still think MMA is a great place to test your art, is because outside of being able to throw a guy down, and then here's another problem. If we said, okay, and this is the argument that a lot of Kajukenbo guys make. No, MMA is a sport. I would be able to beat an MMA fighter. And I'm not gonna say all Kajukenbo guys say that because some of the Kajukenbo guys do not agree with what I just said, but I've heard Kajukenbo guys say this, specifically Kajukenbo guys and American Kempo guys. If I were able to put my finger in the MMA fighter's eyes, I'd be able to blind him, and then when he's on the ground, he wouldn't know what to do with a head stomp or whatever. And they're completely bypassing. And it's funny, this goes with what the Gracie guy said. The Gracie guy said earlier, his mention about physicality. He used the word physicality because an unsaid thing in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is pure Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu does not use power or strength. They use the magic, secret techniques of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to subdue their bigger, stronger opponent.
Tell that to the roided up Jiu-Jitsu champions of today.
And that's what he's talking about. He's criticizing that, right? Physicality that was highlighted in that comment. And that's one point that they're overlooking is if you're getting ready for a sport, and we're going to wrap this up because we hit the 30 minutes. If we're looking at a sport like MMA, all those guys and all those young women and young men are athletes, all of them. Unlike UFC 1, where you had a guy like Tank Abbott that would chug a beer for show before going in and beat the crap out of a guy. You won't see that anymore. You'll see him drink afterwards. There's stories of who was it? I think it was Fedor. I think it was either Fedor or Boss Rutan. He would put some vodka and wash his mouth out with vodka so he'd smell like alcohol. Just even though he wasn't drinking, just to smell like alcohol, because just to throw off his opponents to make him think that he might be drunk. Right? This is the kind of old school MMA stories from the original that you won't see anymore because they see it more as a sport. So they're getting ready for it. You'd never hear of, think about the backlash if you heard that some pro football player was drinking before a game. Think about the backlash that guy would get, especially if they lost the game. They'd come after him like so bad. So a lot of people are coming more to MMA as an athlete and training like athletes. They're physically fit, like they're really in great shape, and that might outdo some of the technique areas.
You can get a long way on pure athleticism and genetics in mixed martial arts, in any sport, but mixed martial arts especially.
Yeah, and that's why you see whenever you see a crossover guy, some guy coming from wrestling, some guy coming from American football, they do well because they already have that box checked. So the rabbit hole that people fall under when they say they're going to be a traditionalist or do these secret techniques and that they want to go back to the more combat days is because you're not going to be tested, because you're not going to be tested on athleticism. And then how are we going to test it? How can we objectively say that what you do would be more effective? And then what are you more effective against? I guess this is the other question.
Exactly. A lot of karate and hybrid martial arts and traditional martial arts, they are training things that were trained for the average man of 100 years ago. You know, most modern people still can't fight worth a shit, but they can fight better than the average man 100 years ago. The average kid off the street today probably knows a guillotine. May not do it perfect, may not do it well, but he can try. And it's in our conscious psyche. It's in our lexicon now. So the average Joe today is better, but a lot of those traditional styles that think they're training for real fighting and real streets and things, they're still training techniques that were fighting for dudes who didn't know what a guillotine was 50, 60 years ago. If that makes sense.
Or didn't expect a kick. They didn't expect the kick. Kicking was considered dirty fighting. Kicking was considered dirty fighting in my generation in the 90s. In the 90s, all in the 90s, right? 90s is when things started to change. I see more YouTube videos of people kicking each other. But if you started,
UFC 1 opened up with a head kick to the teeth.
Yeah, so like if you got in a street fight and someone straight out challenged you, let's go, let's brawl. It was unsaid that what you just kind of agreed to was a bare knuckle boxing match with maybe a little bit of a ground and pound, and your friends are probably going to pull you apart. Like once you hit the ground, they're going to get you back up and kind of make you kind of adhere to boxing rules. And as time moved on, you're seeing less of that, right? You're seeing, and not to say that an all-out, no, two people trying to kill each other didn't start trying to kick each other and stuff. They would, but for the most part, things have changed even since then, right? So like, what are you really training for? And I want to say, like, for MMA, for the MMA guys, I just said they're all athletes. They're training to fight another athlete who's prepared and gone through a specialty, figured out what they're good at, and then trained in a bunch of different hybrid martial arts to be as good as they can get, compared to a hybrid martial artist who's preparing to defend themselves against an opponent that may or may have not trained, has perhaps some training or no training behind them. So the goals are completely different.
MMA being sport is athlete versus athlete. Hybrid martial arts generally are individual versus average Joe.
Yeah.
And I think that's where that is a big distinction between the two. And that's not saying that there's not hybrid martial artists that make strength training and cardio training part of their hybrid martial art. And that to me is one thing that stands out in things like Kajukenbo, is that we do try to have a certain level of athleticism to our game, you know? And I think you're right. That is a strong indicator of whether it's mixed martial arts or a hybrid system. Are you training for another athlete for a competitive idea, or are you training to defend yourself versus a would-be attacker that is untrained? Which is a flawed ideology to even begin with, because you should train for the worst case scenario. You can't assume that the kid that you're about to fight didn't do 4 years of wrestling in high school and a 1 week jiu-jitsu class and got really damn good at that guillotine he's about to put you in. That's the mentality I have anyway. Like, I want to train people in my hybrid martial arts. You know, I got a black belt in Krav Maga. I'm an instructor in Jeet Kune Do and Kajukenbo, all hybrid martial arts. But we train mixed martial arts and we train combatives, and we train it to assume that we're going to fight the athletic person. You know, because you don't know who you're going to deal with. You don't know what any given individual can do, and the average individual today is a hell of a lot better.
Prepare for the worst and hope for the best. Like that's the best you can do, is prepare for the worst and hope for the best. And if you do that, then you're covered. You're covered, in my opinion. Well, we have hit our 30 minutes. Hey, for those of you who just checked this out, we really appreciate you sitting and listening to this conversation. I try to release at least one of these a month. I want to thank Tim for coming. Tim, can I call you Tim? I never even asked you that. We've been calling you Tim.
Yeah, I go by Tim more often than not.
Oh, okay. All right. I wasn't sure if we're at that level of camaraderie yet. But anyway, I want to thank Tim for coming out and sharing his thoughts on this topic. Every month, we release at least one of these. Hey, if you have comments, go and throw them in there, type them out. I have a pretty friendly group here. So if you go on my YouTube channel and have a discussion with some of the other people there, I rarely see people attacking each other the way I do on Facebook and other platforms. So if you want to have a discussion and continue this topic of hybrid martial arts versus MMA, go and throw it on there. Also, if you can, tag what martial art you do, what hybrid martial art you do, and why you enjoy or do not enjoy some of those aspects that we just talked about. Anything you want to promote, Tim?
No. If you're interested in trying some mixed martial arts, but a hybrid theory behind it, and you're in the Arkansas area, you can check us out. Cult Combatives. All
right. I guess if you're interested in training in Japan, I laugh because I don't think I'm gonna come all the way just to train at my gym. But if you're up in Japan, Level Up Gym, check out the Instagram. You can see us there. Catch you next time.